Live. Now, I am going to take a second just to check my phone and make sure it's coming through on my phone.
Okay.
And then in the future, we can always clip that out. And I want that off. And we're going to get rid of that. And we're going to go to here. Now let's go to Facebook. And let's go to the page. And let's see if it's coming through. I don't want to have friends right now. Hold with us just a second. We're doing some cool stuff on the phone if anybody's there. We're just going to clip it out anyway. No. Where can I see it there? Katie Brom, I hope I said that right. Thank you for liking the page. Okay, it's actually coming through.
Oh, we're on the phone.
Yeah, and now we can see it. So let me go here and let me mute that. That way if anyone says anything, we can kind of see it.
Right,
and I should
good.
probably... So we can see right now there's 0 viewers. 0 people are watching.
Uh-huh.
So we're good. We're okay there. But I do want to make sure the media's coming through. So we can see right now there's 0 viewers. Cool. 0 people are watching. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that little stand over here, so if there's a question asked, we can just kind of see it like that. Just leave that this way. What's funny is when you have the audio on here and you listen to it while you're recording, it just feedback loops like crazy. And you get like an endless loop of consistent audio. Maybe we could do it like this. That should be seen, although it probably sounds like we got an earthquake going on. We'll do that. And then we'll just do that. Okay. Let's make sure we both pop up on screen here. This is going to be delayed, so don't pay too much attention to it. Do you want anything in the background there?
So it's just fine.
Yeah. So when I made the logo for Alabama Care, I tried to put that into, did you see the logo for Alabama Care? And Grandpa was like, I don't get it. No. And then I kind of walked him through the story, and he was like, all right, it's okay. It's okay. Okay, so we're with Alabama Care, and my name is Alex, and this is Jane. And we are going to be talking a little bit today. We're going to be talking a little bit today about sibling relationships. Now, Jane I'm going to let Jane introduce herself.
Well, my name is Jane Bosler, and Bridget is my sister. She's my sister. I don't know what else to say other than that, but she does have cerebral palsy, and she is profoundly impacted intellectually. A little bit, just so you know where I'm coming from. I've been in the special ed field for 37 years as a special ed teacher. I am married, and I have 3 children. They're grown. 2 of them are already married. And I don't know, what else do you want to know about me in that aspect?
So Jane is my aunt, for people that wouldn't know that. And she's very active in Bridget's life all the way through, and still to this day very active. And it's a real team effort to make sure that Bridget, continues living a great life. And I'd like to thank Jane for being a huge part of that. So, okay, so we'll kind of dig in here. You already mentioned that you are in the special ed. So are you in Alabama or?
I am currently living in Georgia, and I started my career in Illinois and followed my husband with his job to Georgia. But I've been in special ed since 1982. So.
And you are pretty soon, I heard you're retiring.
I am.
I know you're retiring. But
This is my last year, and I will be retiring at the end of this school year. Looking forward to that time. But I also know I will continue working in the field.
So that's awesome. She's deserved it many times over. And then when you retire, are you planning on staying in Georgia or?
We will be moving to Mobile, Alabama, which is where my daughter...
Roll Tide, Roll Tide.
I guess we'll have to change from bulldogs. But that's where my daughter and her family live, and my sister lives across the bay as well.
Awesome. So family all the way around, being close by. And you mentioned you have 3 kids. Of course, Chris is your oldest. He's my cousin. He's, like a couple years older than I am? 2 years older than I am?
I think so.
I'm 32. I think he's 34,
I
35.
think he's 35, but I lose track of it.
Yeah, and then Meg, she's my cousin as well. She's a month older than I am, so she was born in June. I was born in July.
She was born in May.
Was she really?
She
yeah.
was.
I thought she was like June 3rd.
No.
So she's got a little bit more than a month on me.
Yeah.
She's got like a month and a half on me then. And then Steve, also her son, Steve is a couple years younger than I am.
He's 29, yeah.
And then kind of growing up. Now, I know a little bit of history there, but you are the oldest daughter of a military family.
I am.
So that provided a lot of, I'll say adventure, but opportunity to kind of explore the world there. You got to, see a lot of different parts of the United States and the world. Where are some of the places that you've lived?
Oh, my goodness. At one point, I counted that I had attended 13 different schools. That includes the different colleges. And I thought everyone moved every 2 or 3 years. I didn't know people actually settled down and stayed in one spot. Intellectually, I knew that, but emotionally, I just wasn't there. So we lived, I was born in Germany. We went back for a second tour when I was in junior high, middle school, whatever you want to call it these days. Lived in New York. I lived in Pennsylvania, Virginia, Georgia, Illinois. So pretty much all of it down the East Coast.
Yeah. You doing West Coast? I never heard of any West Coast, actually.
No, that would be more Navy or something.
Yeah, it was Midwest over to the East Coast and then Germany. Born in Germany, guys. Pretty cool. All right, cool. So you mentioned a little bit there that your sister is Bridget, and Bridget was born diagnosed with cerebral palsy and spastic diplegia. And I kind of want to talk a little bit about your relationship with Bridget growing up. And just kind of like a broad overview to get us into this in there. But how do you remember her as a child, attitude-wise?
Well, and I want to go back a little bit about when she was born, because when she was born, my parents knew, my mother knew something was not right. Bridget is the youngest of 3, and so my mother had 2 normal children, for whatever normal is these days. And Bridget just wasn't normal from the get-go. My mother had to teach her how to nurse. She just didn't have that sucking instinct. And it wasn't until Bridget was 18 months, and my mom kept telling the doctors, something is not right. And so they went to actually, I think they went to a doctor in Philadelphia, which is where they were living at the time, or they were close by there. And that's when she was officially diagnosed with cerebral palsy and with being profoundly mentally disabled. And she can't hear. Her auditory nerve is impacted as well. So she can hear kind of like Charlie Brown speech. It's garbled, so she's never learned to speak because of that. The reason she was born with these disabilities is that I had German measles when my mother was caring for me, and that was 2 or 3 years before the shot for German measles came out. And so my mother caught the German measles when she was in first trimester.
Yeah.
And then the result is Bridget is profoundly handicapped.
So there were some things early on that maybe your parents, grandma and grandpa, had a feeling about, where it was, she nursed Lee, you said?
She just wasn't meeting all the milestones, and not even kind of close to meeting milestones. And the doctors just wouldn't listen to my parents' concerns.
Would they talk to you about that, early concerns like that? Would they say, do you remember?
I was still pretty little.
Yeah,
she was 5. I was 5 when she was born, so they would not have been conversing with me about that. And growing up, I would say probably more as an adult and talking with my parents about how they felt when she was first diagnosed. And that came just from being a mom, because here I was having kids of my own and wondering, what if my children ended up with something like this? How would I handle it?
Yeah.
So that's when we started talking adult to adult about how they dealt with news.
Yeah. I imagine at 5 years old, that's just something that's incomprehensible kind of at that point.
Well, she was just always my sister from the get-go. I talked to my mom about the first time that I became aware that something was different with her. Because growing up, I don't remember thinking of her as different. I just always thought of her as my sister, Bridget. And my mom was telling me recently that when the first time she informed me that there was something not quite right with Bridget was when I was 9 or 10 years, on 4th, 5th grade, in that time period. And Dad was fighting in Vietnam, and we were renting a house in upstate New York. And the family that owned the house lived in the basement. They were from Poland, and their daughter, Barbara, was an adult, but she wasn't an adult. Mm-hmm. And I never thought of Barbara as anything other than Barbara either, but some of my classmates evidently told me that Barbara was retarded. And I came home and asked my mom what that meant. And so that's when she tried to explain to me as a 9, 10-year-old what that term meant. And then she also told me that my sister was retarded, because back then we used that term.
Yeah.
It wasn't considered an inappropriate term to use like today. And I don't remember being devastated by that news. It was just, oh, okay, Bridget's retarded. And that's just, it didn't change how I viewed her. It just, that's who she was, and she had a title now.
Yeah, it was like the name didn't change anything.
No, the name didn't change who she was. Growing up, I don't remember my friends being impacted by being around her. If you were going to be in my life, you were going to see my sister. I didn't try and hide her because I didn't see any reason to hide her. She was part of who I was, part of the family. So, my friends, even to this day, here I am almost 60, and they still ask about her when we communicate either by Facebook or in person or phone or what have you. How's your sister Bridget doing? So she's just always been part of me.
I feel like that's I feel like that's a very fortunate thing, but it doesn't happen for every family. Sometimes there's outside pressures, and even at a young age, like if a 5-year difference there, and kids can be kids in school, mm-hmm. And some teasing there, and sometimes that can create some uncomfortable situations. But you didn't experience that.
I didn't, and I'm not really sure why. I know my middle sister really struggles with, and has over the years, struggles with a relationship with Bridget. And from what I understand, she faced and experienced a lot of ridicule from her peers. And I didn't, and I don't know why. I would often take Bridget to different events and just kind of haul her around with me. I remember taking her to the beach with friends. We lived in Virginia at that time, and a great memory I had was my parents refused to get a handicap parking sticker. So we had to haul my sister all over the place and park way. Well, when you go to Virginia Beach in the middle of the summer, there is no parking right by the beach. And so there was a handicap spot, and I thought, well, I'm going to take it because she is handicapped. And so I pulled up, and I opening the door to get her out, and then the blue lights were right behind me.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
They were fine?
Yeah, they were coming after me. And when I opened the door and got her crutches out, because at that point she still could walk quite a distance with crutches. As she's aged, she can't do that as much. And so when the police officer saw me get my sister out, he said, "Have a good day, ma'am." And we did. I just would take her places because she enjoyed it so much. And
she still does.
She still does.
She loves getting out in the car and traveling in the community and stuff like that. Now, your mom, my grandmother told me a story that there was one peer of my mother that was on the bus, and it kind of teased my mom. And you being the oldest sister, I guess they lived like directly behind you. I don't know if you remember this story. We were talking about it earlier today, and she, being the older sister, you stood up for your sisters, and you marched right over there, and you told that kid, I don't know if it was a boy or a girl, and the mom, because the dad was, I think Grandma said was flying in Vietnam in the Air Force. And you went over and told them that that's not the way they should act, that you couldn't believe that a kid would act like that. And the mom was just, and there was not much communication after that. So always sticking up for your sister.
Well, and that, it's one thing to be, to disagree with family members. It's another thing when someone outside the family attacks the family.
Yeah.
And that's when standing up for each other is really important. And I remember taking Bridget trick-or-treating and in the neighborhood that we were in Virginia, and just enjoying that and having her enjoy being out in the community. And then I got to trick-or-treat longer than most people, too.
Yeah.
I had to dress up to be with my younger sister. So
That's
that
funny.
was fun. An excuse to go get candy. Oh, you asked me how other siblings might not have ventured as well with a handicapped sibling.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that has a lot to do with how my parents reared the family. And just we were expected to go on and live our lives just like any other family. You wouldn't have been held back because of what your brothers were doing. And my parents did not make me feel guilty for being involved in all the different activities I was involved in, or going out on dates or what have you. I was expected to help at home, but I wasn't pressured to stop living my life. And I think that's critical to avoid siblings feeling negative toward a handicapped sibling, that they be allowed to live who they are and still be involved in the family and still have family expectations as well. That's just part of being family. So kudos to my parents for not holding me back for who I went on to be.
I give them kudos as well. I think that they framed that very well as just matter-of-factly, and you took that on as matter-of-factly. Bridget is Bridget, and she's my sister, and I love her. But I still got to live my life, and she's going to live her life.
Yeah.
And so I think that was a really big thing that Grandma and Grandpa did really well.
Well, from early on, besides working with Bridget, I also volunteered in the community with other children who were experiencing different handicapping conditions. I remember from the time early in high school, I might have even been in junior high, that's what we called back then. I volunteered.
Early high school?
Early high school,
Never heard
and
early
well,
high school
but
before.
early in high school or junior high, now called middle school. I would volunteer with Special Olympics, and in college I worked at a camp in the summers for various handicapping conditions, not just people like Bridget, but the blind and the people who are blind and deaf, and handicapped adults, and so I always been involved with that population, and I felt comfortable because it wasn't. I didn't see people in that with a disability as being something to avoid. I was there, and I was fortunate to be able to help them. That was a gift that I could give. And then when I started looking at a career, I originally was going to go into speech pathology and audiology. Decided that wasn't my calling. And when I took some time off from college and then finally went back, I decided that I wanted to go into special education. I did not choose the profoundly handicapped field. I have been mainly focused on mild disabilities, with learning disabilities and attention deficit and health conditions and emotionality, but still very active in the field of special ed.
Yeah.
Passionate about it.
That's awesome. And okay, let's keep going here. Kind of lost a little track in the conversation.
Oh, that's okay.
We kind of talked about this earlier, but and you hit on it. But the benefits of having a sibling with special needs. Remember when we were talking, you were saying it really, when you have somebody with special needs, especially a sibling there, it doesn't allow you to say, "Hey, I want the attention as much." If you'd like to speak on some of the benefits of having somebody, in the family with special needs, and how that helps more people to, want to give back, I guess I should say. And I think you hit that on the head when you were talking about volunteering at different organizations and doing that stuff. But I think sometimes when kids are young, that's a trouble for them, is they want a lot of the attention there, me kind of a thing. But there are a lot of good things that we talked about before that come out of that.
I think having a sister with the types of disabilities that Bridget had, pretty involved disabilities, that took a lot of my parents' time, especially my mom's time. It helped me be a more caring person. It helped me be a more independent person. I didn't feel slighted in any means, but it helped form who I am. I think had I not had a sister like Bridget, I don't even think, I know if I'd not had a sister like Bridget, I would not have been volunteering in the field. It wouldn't even have been a consideration because it wouldn't have been discussed. And so having had her in my life, it's made me a better person in the long run and has certainly guided the paths that I've chosen in life. Besides my career, my 3 children know Aunt Bridget just as Aunt Bridget, and they are very comfortable being around her, and they enjoy seeing her, and they talk with her just like we're talking right now. I think for me, the impact that Bridget has had on my life has extended me outside of the family. It has certainly, because of the families I've impacted as a special educator, and then they've gone on and impacted other people. And so I've helped change lives because Bridget has changed my life.
Mm-hmm. That's very good. Excuse me. We talked a little bit about, this is kind of a, I'm going to say a little bit pointed question, but is there, was there a first time that you had a feeling that Bridget might have specific difficulties when you were younger, like crutches or eating? Did you pick up on that before anybody else? Like,
I don't know if before anyone else. I think the biggest challenge as a sibling, and I hadn't even remembered this until you mentioned the eating piece. The challenge was sitting next to her at the dinner table, because my parents are very big on family dinners, which I then carry forward into my family. And so if you sat next to Bridget, you had to guard your plate because Bridget didn't know how to ask for more food. And so she would finish what she had on her plate. She would just reach over and take it off her plate. So that was something that I grew up guarding my plate. So that would probably be the biggest thing I thought about. Certainly walking with crutches and the therapy she did. I don't know that I didn't see it as different. It was just Bridget.
Yeah, it was like it's just your sister, and
Yeah.
that's how she is.
Yeah, and she was just as bratty as my other sister. She would come in my room and take my stuff, and she knew she wasn't supposed to be in there. And she'd giggle because she knew she wasn't supposed to be in there.
She still does that. I mean, if you have food next to her and she's finished, not even if she's finished her plate, she's still got food on her plate.
Yeah.
She still wants your plate of food.
And she's hoping you're not noticing. She reaches over.
She'll wait till you look away or till you walk away from the table. And she lives in her own house now, but her direct care staff, she'll wait till they get up off the table to go do something, and she'll just
because she knows she's not supposed to.
Yeah,
yes.
Their plate is not her plate.
Yes.
So that's pretty funny. Okay, let's see here. Parents structured the conversation was really good. You didn't feel burdened. It was your life, not hers, and she's going to live her life, not yours.
But yes and no. I always wanted to stay involved in her life, and I have made point of doing so. She needs help, and I'm able to provide help. So there you go.
We're going to get into that a little bit later too with the Q. Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask you a little bit about that.
Okay.
But let's talk about kind of her schooling. Do you remember her path through the education system, early intervention, stuff like that? Was there anything that really stuck out there? Or I know, you'd mentioned that there were laws that were passed in the 70s that required schools to provide services to the special needs community. But before that, and Bridget was born, she would be hitting kindergarten right about that time in the early 70s. But do you remember, was it a struggle there for the family to get her involved in education, and how did that kind of go there?
It was, and I don't remember my parents making a big issue about it, but the law that mandated education for individuals with disabilities didn't come into place until the early 70s, and then it took a while for districts to actually implement the law, even though it came into place at that point.
Is that the Wyatt?
No, it was Public Law 94-142, which has since been changed
Okay.
to a different name over the years. But that was again, it was like 1973, 74 was when it was passed. And before that, it was up to individual districts to decide if they were even going to offer any services. So, of course, moving around in the military, goodness only knows what they offered and where we were headed. My parents were responsible for finding the therapy, whether it be speech therapy or physical therapy or occupational therapy, because it just wasn't provided by the school system. So we've come a long way with education in serving individuals with disabilities.
Yeah, I can imagine that that would be stressful on the mom, well, the family all the way around, but each time you were to move, and even if you were to stay in one community, that's a lot of if you couldn't go to a school district and say, hey, this is what my son or daughter needs, and they weren't prepped for it, it's like you were starting fresh and building their system for them each time. Individualized care for that, son or daughter.
Well, and they didn't have to write those IEPs that they have to write now. That wasn't mandated. I remember when I was college age, my parents moved to Illinois at that time, and that's when the first time I really remember her going to public school. And that would have been in the 80s, late 70s, early 80s, that she was in a public high school, and certainly in small group classes, because that's all that was provided at that time, and working on eating and care for her and that type of thing.
She went to Greenville High?
She did.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
I did not know that.
Now, she didn't graduate, but they would have kept her till she was aged now. And I'm not even sure they kept her till she was 22 like they do now, but...
Yeah. I didn't know she went to Greenville High. That's something I never knew.
Yeah, a short period of time.
So there were quite a bit of, moving around and getting into new school systems. And really at that time, it was the laws and the districts weren't enacting it as it is now. It's not as easy as it is now back then. So that took a lot of effort from the family there. Well,
one of the things that my parents did before they moved to Illinois, I was a senior in high school, and they kept her at home. My great aunt, who I'm named after, lived with us from the time my dad went to Vietnam, so I was 9, 10, until I was a senior in high school when they decided to place her in an institution for the first time. And so that was really difficult. I remember as a 17-year-old, my parents grappling with that decision and many tears, and realizing they could not provide the supports that she needed. So they put her in an institution in Virginia at that time. And I remember telling my mom, and this is before I knew I was even going in the field, but I was volunteering in the field, and telling her, it's okay, you're putting her with people who are specialized in this field to help her out. And it was a great resource for her because she received such strong interventions. It was the first time at the age of 12 that she was taught to eat something other than baby food, because she didn't have the strength in her jaws, and that's where that therapy comes into play to even eat solid food. So my mother was making baby food for 12 years because Gerber just wasn't something you went out and bought readily at that time. It was the first time that Bridget was taught to be potty trained, and she was potty trained for a short period of time. Up till then, my poor mother had cloth diapers through 12 years of my sister's life.
That's a lot of laundry.
That's a lot of laundry. Yeah, so it was a good move for Bridget at that time, but it was a very difficult decision for my parents to make. And then they moved to Illinois and had to start all over with her care, and that's when she ended up going into the high school setting before they put her in another institution.
I know there's a lot of controversy surrounding the institutions, and there are no more institutions in Alabama. No. And Bridget was at one in Partlow, but that I know families that I've talked to, some say that the things that some institutions were able to provide, like that one-on-one basis, especially when it wasn't so readily adopted by the education system, were really the only resources. Because not every family is equipped for that next step in their son or daughter's development. If they they don't have that experience. So there's a lot of controversy surrounding that.
It is, and one of the things we were fortunate is that my great aunt lived with us, because otherwise my parents would not have been able to have afforded to send me to college and my sister to college, because they both had work. And so that allowed my mom and my father to work after my dad retired from the military. And then my aunt cared for my sister while they went off to work. But Bridget stayed at home. They had to continue to get that therapy. So when they placed her in the institution in Virginia, and then later when they moved to Illinois and put her in an institution there, the benefits of the institution was all of the individualized care, all that intensive intervention and therapy was housed in one place. They didn't have to run around and take her to those different places. And she stayed involved in my sister's life. She came home on a regular basis, and it's almost like she was away at boarding school. She lived there and then came home on the weekends and saw us and went on back to school.
I heard a pretty funny story where she came home, I think it was for Easter or something like that, and she went downstairs and tore through the entire fridge. Just threw everything outside of, just everything in the fridge. She tore it out, threw it on the ground, and Grandma was like pulling her hair out. She's like, no.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the institutions, and you were mentioning that in those types of settings, a lot of the services are centralized. Everything's right there for you. And with the closing of the institutions, I don't know if they closed everything in the U.S., but I know they did in Alabama. And I know it's a process that they're going through in closing all those institutions. Are there some things that you see kind of similar in the pros and cons in special ed at a broader environment from a teacher location? So I'm going to kind of prime the question we talked about there's a really big push right now for inclusion in the classroom, everybody in the classroom together. If you could just talk a little bit about the pros and cons of that.
Sure. I've seen the whole gamut with special ed because I've seen where if you were identified with any kind of disability, you were placed in a small group setting away from your peers, and that wasn't healthy in many aspects. But what that did provide was that intensive instruction on a daily basis, ongoing basis, to help those students become more successful adults and hit their potential as high as it could be. And what happened over the years, and I was definitely on that battle of fighting with my previous district in Illinois, fighting for students to be included in the general ed setting. And I think that's important, but I think it can go too far, because what I see happening now is that more times than not, the intensive intervention has been slighted in favor of full inclusion. And the problem in, say, a high school history class is you really cannot meet the academic needs or the social or emotional needs of students of whatever level of disability in an academic classroom where you've got classes of 35, 40 students who are trying to move forward in life with that high level of academics. So there needs to be a balance where you have that intensive intervention to provide the supports that those students need to help them overcome their disabilities and learn how to be as high functioning as they can be, plus getting them in with their peers so that they can have that social aspect. And I think for my family, that's what the gift has been. My children grew up with the social aspect of knowing their aunt, Bridget. Bridget grew up knowing my children. Not that she played with them, because that wasn't where she was intellectually, but she would give them the eyeball. You know what I'm talking about, that. She'd acknowledge their existence, which was a big step. She lets them be near her. She eats with them. They play games with her as much as she plays games. So I think there just needs to be more of a balance in education, so that social interaction with peer groups, so people who are not with people with disabilities become more sensitive to the needs of people with disabilities. But I don't think their education needs to suffer to get that done in an academic classroom. So there needs to be a different way to do that.
Yeah. I think you hit it on the head, that peer interaction, that social interaction, is a two-way street, really, for both parties involved there. And then the other aspect of that is, Bridget might not have been able to advance with the eating, that type of stuff without more intensive care that she would not get in a general public education classroom.
Right.
So it's a give and a take there. I think schools are really battling that out. Not battling it out legally or anything, but just finding that line. And
finding the balance.
Yeah.
When my favorite setup, and we've been there with special education, is when I was able to provide small group instruction to get that intervention, and then I was the co-teacher going out to prompt them to use those skills in the general ed setting. Not to be an English teacher or a history teacher, but to be there to encourage them to use what I taught them in a smaller group setting.
So to see that through, focus on those specific skills, and then in the peer social group, help them through integrating that there. And then another part of that we've talked about a little bit is with the decentralization, back in the day, there were institutions and everything was on one location. And now you don't have that, and that puts a lot more responsibility on the family.
Yeah.
To go, even the dentist, stuff like that, to see the doctor. Now that comes back on the family, and it kind of outsources that work. I will say from the state standpoint, it costs them a lot less.
Yes.
It offsets some of that cost back onto the family, and the family has to make up for that, time-wise and financial-wise. So it is a give and take there. And Grandpa, your dad he didn't want the institutions to go away.
Oh, I know.
And that was a big battle with a lot of people in Alabama. And every time I talk with, when there's there's people from, Alabama that call and they say, your grandfather, we always started off on different sides of the table. That's how the conversation always starts. We were on different sides of the table, and we would battle. And then, we'd come to the point where it's like, well, what's the best for Bridget? And every time they'd come together, it's like, that's the best for Bridget. And they were best friends after that.
Yeah.
So
what's happened, because we just always assumed that Bridget would live out her life in an institution, we never dreamt. And the reason, it was good. It was a good setting. She was healthy. She was cared for. She made progress with her skills, and we could still be involved with her life, but not be responsible for all the minutia that goes along with the care that she needed.
The doctor's visits,
Yeah.
that stuff.
And so when we saw the institutions folding one by one.
Let's step back real quick. So she was in Illinois, and then her and Grandma and Grandpa moved to Alabama,
Yes.
and she was in Partlow down in Tuscaloosa. And she was in Partlow for like 10 years, something like that.
Oh my goodness, I'd have to think about how
I think they moved in 90, and then
They did.
PHI opened in 2005. So she was there for like 15 years.
A long time, yeah.
But I remember coming into town because I would always visit once or twice a year, and we would always go down to Tuscaloosa, and Bridget would come home for the holidays, or and it was a family meal there. But yeah, so you, Grandma and Grandpa, and you guys saw the Partlow that was closing down there.
Closing, yeah. So my parents started researching about other solutions other than putting her in a group home. They were really worried that a group home, which for many adults with various handicapping conditions is a perfect setting. The problem is when you have someone with all the various disabilities she has, who's also nonverbal, it is prime for different abuses. And that's what they were worried about. They wanted to make sure that she was priority. She was safe. She was happy, she was healthy, and anything beyond that was just a gift.
Yeah.
So that was what my parents started looking at, finding other solutions. So they started researching what other options were out there, and that's where they landed on the idea of a microboard. And when they started talking to me about it, this isn't my area of expertise because I deal with a lot higher functioning students with disabilities. But I know because I was a special ed department head of a large high school for a number of years, and so I would supervise various programs with lots of different disabilities. And I remember talking to this one family in particular because they had a son who was very much like my sister, only he was mobile. And he was strong.
Yeah.
And so they were caring for him at home and putting him in public school. And he was starting to age out of the system. He was hitting that almost 22 age. And so I challenged him. I said, what are your plans for later in life? And that was about the same time that my sister's institution was getting ready to close. So I was feeling that personally. What are your plans? And their plans were that his brother would put him in his home. And I said, are you going to do that to your son?
That's a lot.
That's a lot to put on your son. Look what you're going through.
For someone that needs one-on-one care, that's a lot.
Yeah, the mom had to pare down her job because while he was in school, she could send him there, but then she had to be there to pick him up. he run, so we would put him in a fenced yard in the backyard because otherwise he'd run out the front door. Just real intensive support needed, and so I challenged them to really think long term, and I had to look at them long and hard and go, one day you're not going to be here, and that's what my parents never ignored the reality of one day they weren't going to be here. How is Bridget going to be cared for when the one day comes? So that's what they were striving for, because they knew they couldn't physically continue to take care of her in the home, and they didn't want to put that responsibility on either my shoulder or my sister's shoulder. They wanted us involved, but they didn't want her to be a burden to us, because that wasn't how they raised the family.
Yeah, I think, and going back, you said that at a young age, this is Bridget's life. You have to live your life.
Yes.
We're a family together, but you said you never felt burdened like that.
I did not.
And I think that I give Kadzooks kudos to Grandma and Grandpa for kind of setting those boundaries. And I think boundaries is a good word there. So the institutions are closing down, and then Grandma and Grandpa set up, she has her own home, which is a microboard.
She does.
And it's her home.
And I have to tell you, when my dad first started telling me about this, I looked at him and said, you were nuts.
Yeah.
I don't know how you think this is going to happen. But my dad took that as a personal challenge, I think.
As he did most things.
Yeah, and he made it happen. And he brought a number of people on board to help out with it. I was one of them. And so with the microboard, you have a team of people who it's kind of like a board of directors almost. You have to have a manager, you have to have a nurse, you have to have a lawyer, yes, to help out. You have to have what's called a queue, and that's basically a case manager.
And here's the queue.
On the queue. The queue had to be someone who was in the field, either with psychology degree or special ed degree, and I have both, so I was double qualified. Even though I'm not certified in that area of special ed, I'm well acquainted with the field of disabilities, obviously. So we put it together, and they found a home for her, and they found caretakers for her. My dad served as the manager to get the home up and running, and I still serve as her queue. So. And
the queue, just so people that might not be familiar with that, is really heavily involved in the goals, the daily goals, the monthly goals, and the annual plan, which kind of, it is a good communication device for everybody involved to understand where Bridget is and what her goals are for the next year, so that everybody's on board in helping her reach those goals. And those goals, sometimes in your classroom, you said that those goals are month to month, but for Bridget, they might be
year to year. That was a big difference for me to get used to, because again, I deal mainly with students with mild disabilities, and so I'm expected to write goals that those students can accomplish within a year or less time, and then we write new goals if they meet them in a less amount of time, to move them forward. And most of the students I deal with go on to some kind of college, so I'm obviously dealing with much higher functioning students. But with Bridget, when I would write her goals, it took me a long time to realize that the goals I was writing would be unlikely to be done in a year, because it was such an involved situation. But she has made tremendous growth moving out of the institution. I was a big skeptic. I didn't think this was going to happen at all. I really didn't think it was A, going to be successful, and B, I didn't think she would thrive.
Yeah.
And the big worry I had was that the resources were no longer housed in one place. So having the caretakers and training them to take her to the different therapies and finding those therapies and different resources in the community was a big undertaking, but it's been done. And they're out there. It's just finding them.
Yeah, you got to find
connecting them.
Yeah. You really got to connect them there.
So the differences I have seen with her, she's much more social. She interacts. She laughs more. She's more independent. She has more of an opinion about what she wants.
She's not afraid to tell you about her
She's
opinion.
not afraid to tell you that I don't want to do that, or I do want to do this. So yeah, it's been a good move, and it's been, I think, one of the best places she's been since she is not in our home. And I don't know that my 87-year-old mother should have her in a home right now.
That would be trouble.
Yeah.
But I know she would do it. Okay, we are going to, let's make sure there's any questions. If there's anybody watching that has any questions, you are encouraged to type in. We can ask them here live on air as we kind of wrap up here. So feel free to do that. And of course, we are recording this live, and it will be available in different formats. YouTube, we'll clip it down later so you guys, anybody can interact with it and share it. But if you guys have any questions right now for Jane while we're live, she has a lot of experience with Bridget as a sister, as a Q, a lot of experience in special education. She's soon to retire, so department head, this is your opportunity to get a little one-on-one interaction there. Okay, let me go over the last few questions here. Inclusion, you see this school all the way through after 20. What are some of the prison that we talked about that? Just kind of closing statements. Is there anything that you would like to say to families, siblings, to the community in general?
I would say that just to embrace the child you've been given. And I know that my mother had to bury the child she thought she received before she could accept the child that she had. And then remember that those siblings have needs as well, and not to hold them back, but to help them move forward, because eventually when you give them that freedom to move forward, they're going to come back and support that sibling, because that's just how life was in our household. Bridget was Bridget. Bridget is Bridget. Bridget is my sister. And she's been a gift in many ways, in my life, in my family's life, and I think into community, because of the impact she's had on me, my family, and those who are around her. With her home, she has hired 3 people to work there who may not have had jobs elsewise. And so she, while it was a big burden to have someone like that, it wasn't, because in the long run, she's provided more gifts than burdens.
I think that's very well put. So, okay, well, we do not have any questions right now. We are going to stop this recording here. And if you enjoyed this broadcast, please like Alabama Care for further updates on future broadcasts, and to be notified when this recording will be available in other formats, so that you can see different clips from it, share it, and interact with other people on YouTube, stuff like that. So thank you very much for being here with us. Look forward to seeing you next time.